Today we're in Uffington in Wiltshire, and there's a beautiful and very famous Uffington white horse. There's Uffington Castle, which obviously isn't a castle, it's actually a Iron and Bronze Age hill fort, and Dragon Hill, which not that much literature on. There's a lovely little car park at the side. No toilets or anything, I'm afraid. You're out of luck if you want fridge magnets. But it's quite cheap to stay, and particularly if you're English Heritage or National Trust, it's free. And that's the best place to start here, because the other parking that's closer by is only for blue badge holders. And you come out of the car park through a little locked gate and stroll up a moderate hill with a very clearly marked path. I'm afraid you're unlikely to be here without other people, particularly if it's a sunny day, because as you can see, there's amazing views from here over the local countryside, the villages. You can see right the way to the horizon in pretty much every direction. We make our way up this path. You can see pretty clear how to get up there. We've passed the kite flyers, and I'll try to avoid filming them. Unfortunately, no drones here. It did give me an idea, but we'll have to see for future videos, as I'm a bit of a stickler for the drone rules. If people don't want drones, they don't get drones. But if they're happy with kites, perhaps there's a middle way. Now we'll make our way up this hill. You can sort of see it falls away from you ahead here. Now, the hill fort is actually up to the right, out of shot there. You can just about see it as I turn. But before you, you can see a curved slope. And it's a pretty steep slope. I was quite shocked to see people are actually walking up it. I'm afraid you won't be finding me walking up that. Like, worse than climbing flight of stairs 3 times the height of a house. But in that depression, there's a very steep valley with a flat bottom. Behind it, here's the hill fort. You can't really see from here, but it becomes a lot more apparent as you get closer. And as the white horse facing out towards that slope and towards Dragon Hill, which is the small flat mound you can just about make out on the left hand side of the screen, about 40% of the way from the side. You can see a little flat top below the horizon. That's Dragon Hill. Today we're going to visit the 3 sites right next to each other: the horse, the hill fort and Dragon Hill. I would say if you watch next week's video, we're going to be going to Wayland Smithy. And I made a big mistake at Wayland Smithy, looking at Google Maps and following the best way to get there. Whereas actually, by far the best way is to park here and walk in the opposite direction to where I am now along the Ridgeway. And the Ridgeway will take you pretty much straight to Wayland Smithy, and it's a flat, easy walk. You can see, very popular area here with runners. If you like steep, then Uffington Hill, White Horse Hill certainly gives you that. Now we're skipping ahead to the hill fort itself. The hill fort is Iron Age and Bronze Age. It dates to about 700 to 800 years BC, and it was in use through till about AD 34. But although that's what English Heritage say on the signs, quite bizarrely, the most evidence of activity here is actually from the early Roman era. So it did continue to be used for some time after the Roman invasion, but just petered out. I think it's a very striking and certainly defensible position. They really are quite steep slopes. And if all you're fighting is people with hand weapons, then an earth mound already near the top, a bit of a ditch, and wooden barricades was probably a very good defence for a village, because This was a village in this hill fort, although it's called a castle now. That's more a colloquial name. The hill fort had a small settlement here. There's fairly limited evidence, but what they have found is mainly post holes of buildings. So we know there were wooden structures here, not of the wall itself, but actually of buildings inside. So there would have been habitation here. This wasn't a retreat, this was a permanent residence for the local tribe. And you can see here a staircase cut into the mound. So here we come into a slight depression. This is the ditch that runs the whole way round the hill. And you always have to remember that after 2,000 years of erosion, probably the ditches were, let's say, twice as high. They certainly would have been a lot more marked. It's not as elaborate on the way in as Maiden Castle. If you watch my video on Maiden Castle, you can see a very elaborate, maze-like, confusing entrance with a series of dead ends and very much not just defensible, but effectively anyone attacking would be worked into weak spots where they could be picked off. Whereas here it's a pretty straightforward inn. There were actually less entrances during the Iron and Bronze Age, and the entrances seem to have been cut into it during the Roman era from what the archaeologists can see. And the main entrance is definitely one of those. It's a later addition where a staircase has been cut into the side of the slope. Again, remember this would have been twice as high, and it would have been a pretty difficult site to attack. It's always hard to tell how much warfare there was in ancient Britain. Pre-Roman, hill forts obviously were very defensible positions, but if you were attacking with nothing more than swords and spears and axes, and probably without the level of organisation that the Romans had, then probably defence was all that was needed. And I've never really seen substantial evidence of real warfare or attacks between tribes, although clearly there was the need to put those threats off. Here we're walking around the mound. You can see it's not too wide now. You can easily pass someone, and some people are cycling round here. I would say as a cyclist I would probably not cycle around the edge here when people are walking. Call me boring, but a little bit unnecessarily risky for people. But it's probably about 5 foot across the space. So it's a fairly substantial earthwork to throw up around the top of the hill, and it's very visible from the ground. If you go to Windmill Hill, which isn't too far the other side of Avebury, you can actually still see the hill fort at the top. And in some ways the double ditches are clearer, but you can easily stand there and walk across it without actually realising that it's old hill fort. Whereas this is quite obviously man-made. And you have to remember that these earthworks weren't thrown up with, B&Q spades. These were basically dug with tools to hand. I mean, not too much earlier, a lot of the ditches around Stonehenge and other henges were actually done primarily with antlers from deer. And I actually did see a deer down in the fields about a mile from here on my way to Devil's Den, which we'll be visiting in a few weeks. Now here you can see the commanding view. This is over the back where the hill's a bit shallower, but it's still a very impressive clear view. You really can see to the horizon, probably 300 degrees of the hill fort. And it follows the natural contours. It's not Roman in its assertion of civilization, where the Romans would have a straight wall, a corner, a straight wall. It does curve along, although it's rectangular. you can see it does follow the overall layout of the hill, and it was an improvement on what nature had given us rather than an actual assertion of man's requirements over nature, the way that the Romans were. If you see Cerwent and Caerleon in Wales, the Roman walls are straight as a die. You feel like if you put a spirit level on it or a plumb line, you'd have a vertical straight wall the whole length of the structure. Here it very much curves and undulates along the contours of the hill. And it's a shame that you can't really see more, that it's lost to time. Quite what happened here? One presumes that there were shops and houses, a marketplace, trading. These would have still been farmers, hunters, a little bit of both, not exactly hunter-gatherers, but this was the central hub. I imagine ancient Britons living and trading and going about their business here. Originally, there was a V-shaped notch, so the trench was actually a V-shape with a small box rampart at the front and a larger one behind, and there were timber posts stood on both ramparts. But later the ditch was deepened, and the material from that and from elsewhere as well were moved in here, and a parapet wall of sarsen stones appears to have lined the top of the innermost rampart, which sadly long gone. All you can see is scratchings of chalk through the grass now. The stones all been long removed, and without those stones it's hard to imagine quite what the structure was like here. The sarsen stones, if you go to Stonehenge, you can see good examples of the sarsen stones, or if you're lucky enough and you're near Avebury, there's actually the Valley of the Stones with thousands of sarsen stones laid out flat along the whole of the length of the valley. And a lot of those were harvested and used for the avenue at Stonehenge, possibly for here, and also for Avebury and Stonehenge, the wider monuments. To the right you can just make out the white pillar. That's for the Ordnance Survey for mapping the location. That's been selected as the highest point in the castle when it was mapped on Ordnance Survey maps. And now it's a popular spot for people to have a picnic. Probably not the best view from that point, I would say, actually. Walking along the ramparts gives you a much better view. There is actually a Roman and an Anglo-Saxon burial nearby. But there's not really much sign of where the people that lived here for most of its life were buried. Wayland Smithy's about half a mile away, but it's very much an earlier construction. Yet because it's primarily stone, is a lot more complete than this or any of the other hill forts. Although there's no structures obvious, as you walk across the fort itself, you can see nettles. There's clumps of nettles. And sometimes, if you see them from above, when you look down, you can actually see a pattern of what's hidden underneath, even with the naked eye, without using drones or technology. And I found the nettles interesting because they very much are in certain areas. And nettles, well, they like soil that's low on nitrates, and then they put nitrates into the soil. So on the one hand, they migrate around a site. On the other hand, when you have patches of them, it does give a clue to a different type of soil underneath those nettles. So, but possibly there's a bit more there than you can see. But without an archaeologist and a dig, and I think it's quite a while since there's been a dig here, it's fair to say that what you're going to see and understand is the structure of the defences on the hill fort itself. And really, you can sit down, have a picnic, enjoy the beautiful sky, and enjoy the views over to the horizon. We were here in the spring, but in the summer I think it will be a blaze of colour. You can just see the yellow of the rapeseed fields in the distance. And it's still fairly early in the season, so there will be some spectacular views from up here. It's certainly a place to come on a sunny day. I think the first time I came here, it was also a very sunny day just like this. And it's a beautiful spot, not as windy as you normally get when you're so high up. I definitely recommend coming here and strolling over to Wayland Smithy along the Ridgeway. And the Ridgeway gives a clue as to why this is here. The Ridgeway, in its sort of current main form, starts just outside of Tring on the Ivanhoe Beacon, and then works its way past a lot of significant sites down to the edge of Avebury. Really, it finishes at the Sanctuary, which we'll be looking at soon. And this was like the M1 running through England. The motorway of its day became a drover's route and really has never quite gone away after about 5,000 years at least. It's a key route across Britain, and whenever you see significant sites in the south of Britain, you often see the Ridgeways very close by. It runs straight past Wayland Smithy. It runs well within half a mile of this site and heads down to Avebury and past a lot of burials, settlements, hill forts. And partly they're chosen for their location and you presume for some significance, but also for the convenience that the Ridgeway was nearby. It was a route to most of Britain. And although it runs now from Avebury up to Tring, it actually used to head up, I believe, to King's Lynn and down to the south coast. Now, that piece has been lost for hundreds of years, but there is enough evidence that they're actually opening an extended version of the Ridgeway where you can work your way from coast to coast. And although the evidence is a little bit more sketchy, that definitely was a significant migration and travel route. Now we're heading over from the hill fort to the horse. And the horse is interesting because it's very stylised. And it's one of the oldest. It is a prehistoric hill figure. No doubt it's been remodelled and stylised. But it is... The earliest reference goes back to about 1375. The Red Book of Hergest says it's near to the town of Abington. as a mountain with a figure of a stallion upon it, and it's white and nothing grows on it. Yet what I find strange about it is that, as you can see from the top, it's hard to really see it. From Dragon Hill, just below there on the left, it's still fairly hard to see it. And down from the valley, it's hard to see it. Now, even if that grass was very green and a little bit more trimmed, the green and white gives you more contrast, you don't really see the horse very well from the ground. If you see a photo taken from a drone, it's very clear the shape of a naive version of a horse. But it's not really obvious. The hill's too shallow at this point. Actually, a little bit further down would have given the shape that could be seen from the ground, whereas you see curved lines, you don't really see the whole horse from anywhere that I've ever found. And you see there's Dragon's Hill in the background. It's the wrong angle to see it. So really, short of being halfway up the very steep hill, which I said earlier I wasn't going to climb, you can't really see the horse in its real glory unless you're in the air. It does get regularly maintained, and there is a ceremony where people chip the chalk and make sure that it's whitened and clean up the overall shape, hopefully without affecting it. And that's been going on for centuries. For many years, that's actually held inside the hill fort, is where they organise everything and are based. But here at the bottom, you've got Dragon's Hill. And I've included this because I don't view it as an entirely natural hill either. It feels like it's been given some assistance, yet it doesn't give you a view of the horse, so it's not been modified for the horse. It's a lovely horse, probably one of the older hill figures in England, and possibly the most authentic. Like the Long Man of Cerns possibly be given a bit of help with his appendage, and a lot of the Littlington White Horse has been quite substantially amended. Even outside of Weymouth there's a hill figure, but that actually dates to George III. It shows him leaving the town. So we're lost completely to time why that hill figure was put there. It can't be seen from the Ridgeway. It's not really visible from the surrounding areas, but it definitely does date back to somewhere between 1380 and 550 BC, which obviously was very much at the same time as the hill fort. So you have to think that it was a monument display associated with that hill fort. It's well worth visiting. I think if you want to see one hill figure of a horse, then, or of a figure, I would say either Cerne Bass is very striking, the Long Man of Wilmington, and Littlington White Horse. This horse is one of the best documented and one of the most striking, but seen from the ground, you're going to get a much clearer view of those. Now, next to the White Horse, there's a very small sign suggesting the direction to Dragon Hill, and unless you want to go on your hands and knees down a very steep slope, it's definitely the right way to go. There is a fairly steep slope, but nicely dug into steps where you can head down to it, and you can see it in front of us. And if we discuss it from here as we head down before we actually get to it, there's very little documentation on Dragon Hill. So you can see here it's an outcrop, it's a bump, but it's got a very flat top. And assuming that the steps are a bit of a later addition, something that's evolved over time, the steps up to Dragon Hill. Dragon Hill is a mound with a flat top, which immediately speaks to me of what we see at Silbury Hill. Silbury Hill was man-made. They ran circles of sticks and fences, filled it with mud, compounded it, build another ring, build rings on top, and built up a very large hill. Much larger and steeper sided than this. But what I see as similar is the flat top. A flat topped hill. We also, when we went to Arbor Low, there's a small structure that's a mound, but it's about 6 or 8 foot tall, and it's sometimes suggested that that could be a ritual mound. I see this as a ritual mound, an outcrop which has been deliberately flattened to allow for worship ceremonies to be held on that flat top. And frankly, there's no real evidence for that. They didn't leave behind a missal book. They didn't leave instructions of the ceremonies. But often by ceremonial or habitated spots, there's a mound with a flat top. And probably lost to time what the significance and meaning of that was. You have to remember these are going back 2,000 to 3,000 years. But an elevated spot with space for people to stand, where you have a view over the surroundings, where you are lifted above the common living place, really feels to me like that's what Dragon's Hill is. Something that's been deliberately tweaked to make it more suitable for ceremony. Because it's a very flat top for a hill of that size. It feels like part of the top has been cut off. Today it's a viewpoint where most of the visitors to Uffington Hill pop onto it to have a little look, and certainly some beautiful views. This is the road up if you're coming from the Oxford direction. It is a one lane, quite narrow with some steep sides, but it's perfectly passable. And it does lead directly to the car park. Here you can see the staircase, quite a large top here. The top is actually wider than Silbury Hill, and it may just be that this is what the hill looked like. But as I walk around it, I can't help feeling that it's a place of ceremony, just as the hill fort was obviously a defensible position for people to live. The horse was added as a monument or memorialisation associated with that settlement. And this really feels like, to me, I must make it clear to me, it feels like a ceremonial mound, a place put apart from where everyone lived. But again, doesn't have a great view of the horse. When I visit Stone Age, Iron Age, Bronze Age sites, I'm left with a feeling that these were not a primitive people. They possibly had a primitive understanding of the things that we take for granted. But these were people who could shape the earth, who could dig massive ditches, who could build tombs that last 5,000 years, who could build Stonehenge aligned with the stars and the sun, and many henges and ceremonial sites, and adapted their structures to the contours of the earth, a more, not exactly a modern age hippie interpretation of ancient religion, but a religion that appreciated the earth and the surroundings and the beauty of what they saw. I think I've said before that when you go to Stone Age burial, what always strikes me is how beautiful the view is. It's always, nearly always, high up with a spectacular view, far from a water source, and we do know that they visited and opened them. So I see this as a religion that embraced and admired and appreciated the natural world. And when you stand here, you can see that. And you can see the horse. Do you see the feet of the horse there just against the hill? Not very clear for the amount of effort to make a horse, I think. Yet after nearly 3,000 years, the horse still draws thousands of visitors every week. So I would definitely recommend visiting and seeing it, and just enjoying a sunny day out. Really a beautiful sight that's been appreciated for thousands of years. I do hope you've enjoyed visiting Uffington with us, and next week we'll be visiting Wayland Smithy, which is a very different and earlier site to this, but is quite a remarkable quality burial, one of the best I've seen, and a shorter video than this one, I promise. So do subscribe and like, and come back to see us next week.